Topic of discussion today is processes and challenges to democracy. Democracy is a form of government which comes into power because the people support it. The consent of the people are involved in the formation of the government. There are two criteria for a democracy. Number one, people running the government are representatives of the people. They have been elected. Number two, the mechanism for the formation of this government is based on peaceful and regular elections. Now, the democratic forms of government strengthened its position mainly because the earlier monarchical system had several issues. Number one, they lacked accountability. There was abuse of power, lacked transparency, and they had many other problems which actually undermined the importance of individuals. The absolute monarchical system was based on divine rights, and this concept of divine rights of kings predominated the position of the king in the whole country. There are different types of democracy. One, minimalist direct democracy of Switzerland. Two, totalitarian democracy of communist states like North Korea. Three, mixed system such as the blending of monarchy, oligarchy and democracy as in the United Kingdom. Democracy is regarded by many as the highest form of legitimate authority. Most states claim to be democratic when actually they may not be so. Thinkers and philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Hobbes have considered democracy to be one of the worst forms of government, as it could easily be corrupted and it can result in injustice. The chief danger is that majority can impose its will over the minority, and it may finally lead to the violation of the liberties of the minority population. In the 20th century, leaders like Hitler came to power through democratic means, but then after coming to power, totally destroyed the democratic processes and norms and finally led to grave abuse of human rights throughout the world. Democracies to function well require high level of education and maturity among the people. If not, the process can be captured by demagogues who may be speaking of democracy but may be actually following authoritarian means. The modern democracy benefited from mass education of citizens, free press, and Protestant Reformation. Now we'll look into the history of democracy. Starting off, we'll talk about Athenian democracy, which developed in the Greek city-state of Athens. Athens was one of the very first known democracies. Aristotle defined human beings as political or social animals. Men could only live perfect and self-sufficient lives if they became active citizens, following the rules of the city-state and also ready to govern other people. Thus, for Athenians, making laws and arguing about policy was their duty and right. In the Middle Ages, most parts of Europe were ruled by clergy or feudal lords. The growth of centers and city-states led to the great experimentation in non-feudal forms of government. Some cities elected mayors. Elections did take place, although involving a minority of the population. One of the most significant influences on the development of democracy was Protestantism. Hierarchical Roman Catholic Church supported absolute monarchy and was a powerful opponent of democracy and liberalism at that time. The wider sense of democracy entails two principles. One, popular control over collective decision making, and two, equality of rights in the exercise of that control. Now, government is accountable to the people and a competitive election takes place so that the people can get the public office. The people, the general public, they have the right to vote to choose those candidates whom they want themselves to be governed by. Now, why should we value democracy? There are several factors or reasons behind it. Number one, in a democracy, there is equality of citizenship. Be a rich or a poor person, a person with any racial background or of any ethnic background, each and every citizen enjoys equal citizenship. Number two, meeting popular needs. It is the demands of the people which are actually the wishes which are transferred to the government, and the government try to fulfill those demands and wishes of the people. 3. Pluralism, open debate, compromise and persuasion. Decisions are not taken by a single person. It is only after a lot of discussion, open debate, that policy decisions are taken. That is, needs and aspirations of all groups of people are taken into account while decision making is done in a democracy. 4. Guaranteeing basic freedom. The human rights of individuals are best protected in a democracy. 5. Democracy allows for societal renewal. Continuous give and take in the process of democracy rejuvenates the society and takes it to a better and mature level. Development of democracy in England, a very important stage, because England is a place which actually has supported the development of human rights and the democratic processes since a long time. Now, the evolution of the English political institution led to the rise of modern liberal democracy. Now, we can say that the government of the English in 10th century before the Norman conquest and the imposition of feudalism was derived from the customs of Germanic tribes who invaded and settled in England during the 5th century. English were a nation of freeholders living in home states. A group of home states formed a village which had an assembly. 100 or such villages came together and constituted 100, which had a meeting presided over by an elder where they managed their own affairs. A number of hundreds formed a shire. A number of shires formed a kingdom. The kingdom was ruled by White Mott and king. The White Mott was the meeting of wise men who could elect and depose the king, decide about the questions of war and peace, make and amend laws, confirm the appointment of bishops and aldermen, and settle disputes. So, the power of White Mott was quite high. The king was very much respected in the English society, but he could not alter the law, levy a tax or make a grant of land without the consent of the White Mott. English system of government was bottom upwards. Now, the Magna Carta, which is very important document for the protection of human rights, it was issued in 1215 by King John under the pressure of the barons, led by Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, no person could be imprisoned but by judgment by his equals and by the law of the land. The American Constitution followed the processes of separation of power and the processes of checks and balances so that the organs of the government could be limited by each other. No one organ may become absolute in nature and become dictatorial so that the rights of the individuals and the groups in America are negatively affected. Limited government is always a supporter of democracy and a protector of people's liberties. The US Constitution states the three words, "We the people." That is, it is the people who have created the US Constitution. Their importance is the buzzword in democracy. And we should mention here that this "we the people," these three words are also there in the preamble of the Indian Constitution, and we have taken it from the US Constitution. The values of Anglo-American democracy. The main theme running through political evolution is that impetus for greater democracy was the desire to establish rule of law and to preserve and expand freedom. Then an accountable legislature is important and independent judiciary is also important. The value of the individual is given importance in Anglo-American democracy. Individualism was grounded in the nuclear family structure, which valued liberty over the other values of equality and authority. The second value in Anglo-American democracy is respect for tradition and custom as the source of authority and law. The third value in Anglo-American system is that there's a strong Christian component. People naturally tended to be public-minded. Many voluntary societies and charities were formed. Alexis de Tocqueville, in his work Democracy in America, said that he found in America, in her churches and voluntary societies, which gave individuals the organizational strength to exercise their liberties according to their opinions. In France, there was absolute monarchy and the king was the source of all laws and the administrative authorities. Now, the situation of France was not that good. In the 1780s, the state was in the brink of bankruptcy. There was widespread economic and social problems, and the monarchy was not being able to solve these problems. King Louis XVI called the Estates General, whose status and authority was not very clear, to meet for the first time since 1614. Now, the forces that were unleashed soon resulted in the collapse of the royal authority. Estates General turned itself into the National Assembly in 1789 and abrogated to itself the national sovereignty and gave itself the right to create a new constitution for France in 1791, which revolutionized the social and political structure of France. Democracy was coming in France. Feudalism, legal privilege and theocratic absolutism were abolished in the constitution. There was legal equality and abolition of feudal dues. This was widely welcomed by the general population. Declaration of the rights of man and citizen were publicly guaranteeing legal equality. There was the separation of church and state, and the most important point, we can say, religious toleration came in after there was the separation of state and church. Freedom of the individuals, of the French citizens, were giving widespread importance after this. Now we come to the 20th century. That the 20th century has seen successive waves of democracy. After the First World War, the Allies, under the pressure of Woodrow Wilson, decided with the Treaty of Versailles to break up the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In 1917, absolute monarchy of Tsarism was overthrown in Russia. The proletariat gained power. The Bolshevik Revolution brought in a lot of change not only in Russia, but it had its impact in other parts of the world also. After the Second World War, liberal democracies were established in many parts of the world. Post-Second World War, colonies in Asia and Africa got independence. Now, we'll be talking about the problems and the challenges of democracy. The most important challenge is that the majoritarian rule may become tyrannical in nature. In a democracy, it is the rule of the majority which decides the processes of the government, the rights which will be enjoyed by the citizens. But at times, this majority may become tyrannical in nature and may legislate such laws, execute such orders which may actually lead to grave abuses of the rights of the minority population. Number 2, governments in democratic countries are being influenced by powerful and influential interest groups. Lobbying is very high. Prevalence of bargaining democracy is taken over the representative democracy. So, the interest group which has more power of bargaining is getting better amenities, facilities from the democratic government, which is actually detrimental to the rights of individuals in a democracy. The third challenge is that the government at times passes such laws or executes such orders which try to support their own interests. That is, the elites in the society, the political elites and the bureaucratic elites, they are the ones who are in the process of passing laws, executing laws, and they try to pass such laws or execute such orders which will never be detrimental to their sectional interests. This is actually not very good for the health of a democracy, because in a democracy every individual is equal in the eyes of law. Another challenge to democracy is economic hardship. Developed countries are experiencing levels of persistent unemployment unknown since the 1930s. The former communist countries are moving over towards privatization and marketization of their economies, and this is leading to insecurity, intensified inequality, and danger of hyperinflation. Many countries in the South have developed zero or minus growth for years. Actually, this situation is forcing the democratic government in curtailing the welfare programs, and this is, in the long run, negatively impacting the poor and the impoverished in the society. Another challenge is the political impact. Experience of economic hardship currently afflicting many countries and people has inevitably led to political consequences. When the democratic government is failing to provide the facilities and the resources to the individuals and the citizens, automatically the anger towards the state will increase. Social antagonisms are rising. Struggles for economic opposition becoming more intense. Economic migration is taking place. Hostility to immigrants are increasing, and naturally the developed countries are not liking the process in which more and more immigrants are coming into their area in order to get better employment or in search of food or jobs. conditions of economic depression, making it much more difficult to realize the ideal of equal citizenship. A rich person in a democracy will enjoy naturally more rights than a poor person. It is at times said that in a democracy, a hungry person cannot actually utilize his right to vote effectively, because for him, getting food is more important than giving his votes. And at times in many countries of South Asia, we find that votes are being sold in exchange of food grains or cash. Robust democratic systems may be able to withstand the shocks which are being faced in this decade, but difficult for the infant democracies to withstand these shocks, and the economic hardships and the political upheavals are increasing day by day in the democratic countries. Many of the processes and the institutions which determine the economic fortunes of a country are now lying outside the borders. Globalization has come in, and the control of the sovereign state is decreasing. At times, the sovereign countries are not being able to decide the price of raw materials or the terms of debt repayment and inward investment, which matters so much to them, because in the arena of globalization, these decisions are taken by multinational corporations. Market forces are determining the economic destinies, and in such places, sovereign states do not have much to do. Now the question arises, can poor societies really afford democracy? The idea that poor societies cannot afford democracy embraces a number of rather different concerns. Now, organization of democracy is an expensive and time-consuming affair. Elections, for example, in India, takes place after every 5 years, and the expenditure on these elections are really huge. Now, many critics state that the expenditure which is necessary for funding the elections, if it is used for welfare purposes, would actually improve the condition of the poor and the deprived in the society. However, the benefits of democracy is always greater than that of dictatorship. In a democracy, when we are talking of economic development, we do not talk of development as a quantitative concept. We talk of development as a qualitative concept which is aiming at well-being of the population. It aims at income distribution and the state expenditure on health, education, and the armed forces. The qualitative aspects of economic development are themselves dependent on the character of the political regime and the degree of its responsiveness to the population. Democratic electorates are more likely to demand policies that moderate the extremes of economic equality and support state spending on health, education, and physical infrastructure, rather than on military or on prestige projects with little social utility. When a country is spending more on defense aspects, naturally means that the country is spending less on development. A democratic country can only go ahead and advance if its budget is more on development and less on military aspects. An open and accountable regime will use public resources more efficiently than a closed or authoritarian one. An authoritarian regime will bring in major scandals such as widespread human rights abuses, environmental degradation or famine. And the one point which is very much required in a democracy is that there is a need of positive relation between development and democracy, because it is not the development of a few people, it is the development of all, especially those who are the deprived sections who do not get square meals a day, a democracy will only be successful when these people, the homeless, the deprived, the people who do not get the basic amenities, are getting those facilities from the state.